Hollywood's golden age promised perfection, flawless stars, glamorous fantasies, lives sculpted into legends. But behind that shimmering facade was a system built on silence. The studio system didn't just manage careers, it manufactured identities. It rewrote names, erased pasts, staged romances, and forced its brightest talents to live as carefully crafted illusions. The actors the world adored were often strangers to themselves. Tonight, we uncover the hidden truths behind eight stars who lived double lives. Not by choice, but by command. Their faces sold millions of tickets, but their real stories were locked away in studio vaults. They performed even when the cameras stopped rolling, trapped in roles that protected Hollywood's image while destroying their own. Some hid who they loved. Some hid who they were. Some were rebuilt from the ground up, and others paid with their careers or their lives for refusing to play along. These are the lives behind the lie. The stars the studio system controlled, reshaped, and in many cases, quietly broke. And it all begins with the man who became Hollywood's perfect leading man, but never got to be himself. Number 1, Rock Hudson. Before he became the embodiment of Hollywood masculinity, Rock Hudson was just Roy Harold Scherer Jr., a shy, quiet boy from Illinois who dreamed of escaping a broken home. When he reached Hollywood in the late 1940s, he didn't arrive with confidence or training. He arrived with a face the studios could turn into gold, and Universal International knew it the moment they saw him. But the handsome young man they discovered came with a truth the industry considered unacceptable. Roy was gay, and Hollywood wasn't ready for a leading man who loved differently. His powerful agent Henry Wilson, famous for manufacturing male stars, created a new persona for him on day one. Roy Scherer disappeared. In his place stood Rock Hudson, a name built to sound rugged, masculine, and bankable. But the transformation didn't stop there. Publicists trained him to walk differently, speak differently, flirt differently. Everything that made him Roy was chipped away until only Rock remained. The studio immediately launched an aggressive campaign to cement his image. Magazine covers declared him America's most desirable bachelor. Photographers followed him from movie sets to stage dates with actresses he barely knew. Reporters were fed carefully constructed stories about his romantic life, none of them true. Behind the scenes, Rock lived under constant surveillance. Publicists monitored his social circles. Assistants warned him which bars to avoid. If he spent too much time with male friends, whispers spread. If a rumor surfaced, Universal buried it fast. Every step he took had to support the illusion. Rock Hudson, the straight heartthrob millions of women adored. In 1955, the pressure reached its peak. Confidential magazine threatened to expose Rock's private life. The studio panicked and arranged a lightning-fast marriage between Rock and Phyllis Gates, Henry Wilson's secretary. The wedding appeared spontaneous and romantic, but it was damage control, a desperate attempt to protect the image they had built. The marriage lasted barely 3 years. The performance lasted decades. As Rock's fame grew, magnificent obsession, all that heaven allows giant, so did the emptiness behind the mask. Friends later said he lived in a state of constant fear, fear of discovery, fear of losing everything, fear that the persona he played had swallowed the man underneath. By the 1970s, when social attitudes softened, Rock finally allowed himself pockets of freedom. He hosted private gatherings, formed closer relationships, and let trusted friends see the real him. But years of hiding had taken their toll. Even when he wasn't performing for cameras, he felt like he was still acting. Then came 1985. Rock Hudson became the first major Hollywood star to publicly announce he had AIDS. The world was stunned, not because of the illness itself, but because the revelation shattered the lie that had been preserved for decades. For the first time, Rock Hudson was seen not as a fantasy, but as a human being, vulnerable, real, and finally honest. His announcement changed the national conversation around AIDS forever. But for Rock himself, the truth came too late. He died later that year at 59 years old. The studio created a legend. But in doing so, they denied a man the right to be himself, and Rock Hudson was only the beginning. The next star never had a chance to grow into the woman she truly was. Because the studio stole her childhood, reshaped her identity, and fed her pills before she ever understood the price of fame. Number 2, Judy Garland. Before Judy Garland became the eternal girl searching for a place over the rainbow, she was Frances Gumm, a talented, awkward, sensitive child who loved to sing more than anything. But when MGM signed her at just 13, they didn't adopt her. They absorbed her, and they began reshaping her long before she understood what fame truly meant. Judy didn't fit the standard mold of the 1930s starlet. She wasn't tall like Lana Turner, glamorous like Hedy Lamarr, or sultry like Greta Garbo. She was short, round-cheeked, and still very much a child. Louis B. Mayer, one of the most powerful men in Hollywood, famously patted her chin and said she looked like a little fat girl. That moment changed the course of her life. From then on, MGM turned Judy's body into a battleground. Studio handlers restricted her food and monitored her every bite. Assistants slapped away candy from her hands. Publicists ordered her to drink black coffee and chicken soup instead of regular meals. At 14, she was placed on pills, stimulants to keep her awake through grueling shooting days, sedatives to force her to sleep after exhausting nights. Her teenage years weren't spent in classrooms or dances. They were spent running on a chemical schedule the studio insisted she needed to stay competitive. The girl America adored never had the chance to be a girl at all. After The Wizard of Oz made her a superstar at 17, the pressure only escalated. MGM promoted her as America's sweetheart, the innocent, hopeful girl next door. But Judy was collapsing under expectations she could never escape. She feared gaining weight. She feared disappointing Mayer. She feared being replaced. Her relationships were manufactured too. Judy was paired publicly with Mickey Rooney, her teenage co-star, to maintain the image of wholesome young romance, even as both privately insisted they were just friends. When she became older, publicity teams interfered in her dating life, shaping it to match the persona the studio wanted the world to believe. And then came the emotional toll. Years of pills, pressure, and perfectionism took a heavy psychological price. Judy battled insomnia, anxiety, and depression, conditions misunderstood in her era and mismanaged by studio doctors who simply gave her more prescriptions. Her body was exhausted. Her spirit was breaking. By 1950, after filming delays and repeated collapses from overwork, MGM made a decision that shattered her. They fired her. The studio she gave her childhood to discarded her as soon as she became difficult, a label they created by pushing her beyond human limits. Yet Judy fought back. Her voice, miraculously intact through everything, brought her roaring success in concerts, records, and a new wave of admiration. Her 1961 Carnegie Hall performance became legendary, proof of her unmatched talent and resilience. But even during these triumphs, she battled financial instability, tumultuous relationships, and the lifelong shadows of her upbringing. On June 22, 1969, Judy Garland died at just 47 years old. The world mourned a legend. But the tragedy was quieter. Judy never had the chance to fully live as herself. She was raised as a role, crafted as a product, and consumed as a fantasy. Her entire life had been a performance, one she never chose, and Hollywood did not slow down after her. The next star had her identity rewritten, not just emotionally, but factually. Her age, her past, her image. Everything was reconstructed to protect the studio's profits. Number 3, Jean Harlow. Long before Marilyn Monroe became Hollywood's ultimate blonde icon, there was Jean Harlow, the original platinum blonde, the woman whose face defined an era. But behind her shimmering appearance was a life rewritten by MGM, controlled by powerful men, and silenced by a system that valued profit over people. Jean Harlow was born Harlan Carpenter in Kansas City. That name, executives said, was too plain. Her background was too messy. Her marriage as a teenager was too inconvenient. So MGM erased everything that didn't fit their fantasy. Harlan Carpenter vanished, replaced by Jean Harlow, a glamorous persona engineered to sell movies. Even her age was altered to make her appear younger, more remarkable, more born for stardom. And then came the look. Painfully bleached hair dyed with ammonia and peroxide until her scalp blistered, Eyebrows shaved, skin lightened, voice coached. She became a creation, MGM's creation. But her reinvention came at a price. In 1932, the brightest chapter of John's meteoric rise collided with unimaginable scandal. Her husband, Paul Byrne, was found dead in their home, just 2 months after their wedding. The truth behind his death has never been fully resolved. Some believed it was suicide. Others suspected a violent confrontation involving a woman from Byrne's past. Whatever the truth was, MGM made sure the world would never know. Studio fixer Eddie Mannix scrubbed evidence, rewrote the narrative, and ensured the official story painted Baron as a troubled man and Jean as a heartbroken widow. Reporters were silenced, witnesses were pressured, and Jean was ordered back to work almost immediately. Her grief, her fear, her confusion, none of it mattered. MGM needed their star to shine, no matter the cost. From then on, every part of Jean's life was monitored. Her friendships, her romances, her family. Even the money she earned was filtered through her controlling mother, Mama Jean, who viewed her daughter's fame as a financial pipeline. Jean tried to maintain the MGM fantasy, working relentlessly in films like Red Dust, Reckless, and Dinner at 8. But as her career soared, her health deteriorated. Years of exhaustion, frequent illnesses, strict studio diets, and chemical damage to her body began taking a silent toll. By 1937, at just 26 years old, Jean was visibly weak on the set of Saratoga. Co-star Clark Gable watched her struggle to speak lines, walk steadily, or hide her growing pain. The studio insisted she keep working. Every day off meant money lost. But Jean was dying. Her kidneys were failing, worsened by infection, lack of rest, and years of physical strain. MGM downplayed her symptoms in the press, insisting she had the flu. They could not afford the public to see their golden star fade. On June 7, 1937, Jean Harlow died, a global icon at 26. The studio mourned the myth they created, but almost no one saw the woman underneath, the one Hollywood had consumed in the pursuit of perfection. Jean Harlow didn't live a lie by choice. She lived the version MGM demanded of her, and the real Harley and Carpenter never got the chance to return. Her death exposed the darkest reality of the studio system. It would rather lose a star than admit its role in destroying one, and the next star paid a similar price, not through reinvention, but through trauma, secrecy, and a life that fell apart the moment Hollywood decided he was no longer useful. Number 4. Montgomery Clift. Before James Dean ever became a cultural icon, Montgomery Clift had already rewritten the definition of a Hollywood leading man. Sensitive, intelligent, intensely authentic, Monty didn't act from his face like many stars of the era. He acted from the soul, and audiences felt it immediately. But Hollywood had no idea how to handle a man who refused to play by their rules. Monty arrived in Hollywood in 1947 as a fully developed artist. He had spent years on Broadway, shaping his craft, refining his instincts, and rejecting anything that felt false. But this independence clashed violently with the studio system. Executives wanted a handsome puppet. Monty was a thinking man, thoughtful, private, and unwilling to be molded. Even worse for them, he didn't fit neatly into Hollywood's expectations of masculinity. Publicists crafted false narratives about the women Monty was supposedly dating. Studio fixers placed him at stage dinners with starlets to reassure gossip columnists. All while Monty quietly hid relationships that would have destroyed his career if exposed. Behind every magazine cover was a life lived cautiously, fearfully, in constant negotiation with the truth. And then came the night that changed everything. On May 12, 1956, Monty left a small dinner party at Elizabeth Taylor's home in Beverly Hills. Minutes later, his car slammed into a telephone pole. Elizabeth, sensing something was wrong, rushed to the scene and found him slumped over the wheel, face shattered, teeth lodged in his throat, bleeding heavily. She saved his life, literally pulling his broken teeth from his airway with her bare hands. Montgomery Clift survived, but the man the studio had spent years polishing did not. In the mirror, Monty saw a stranger. His once symmetrical features were altered, His expressions changed. His face looked haunted. Hollywood panicked. They urged him to disappear until he looked like himself again. But Monty refused. He returned to set, still swollen, still in agony, determined to finish Raintree County. The studio responded by lying. Press releases insisted Monty had fully recovered. Old photographs were recycled in magazines to maintain the illusion. Directors were ordered not to mention his injury. Hollywood needed to pretend its brilliant, vulnerable star was still perfect. But Monty was not perfect. He was hurting, and the pain consumed him. The physical trauma spiraled into emotional torment. Monty turned to painkillers and alcohol to function, creating a dependency that worsened with each passing year. He worked when he could, avoided crowds when he couldn't, and hid behind rooms darkened by curtains to avoid photographers capturing the changes the studio denied. Yet despite everything, his talent never faded. In Judgment at Nuremberg, his short but devastating performance earned him an Oscar nomination. It was raw, truthful, almost unbearably human, a glimpse of the man he had always been beneath the Hollywood mask. But his body could no longer endure the pressure. On July 23, 1966, at just 45 years old, Montgomery Clift died alone in his apartment. The official cause was a heart attack. Friends called it something else, the longest suicide in Hollywood history. Monty's life wasn't destroyed by scandal. It was destroyed by silence. The silence he was forced to maintain to protect the image studios needed. And that silence was mirrored in a different way by the next star. A woman Hollywood transformed so completely, she became a stranger to her own identity. A goddess created from the ruins of the person she once was. Number 5, Rita Hayworth. Long before she became the face of seduction in Gilda, Rita Hayworth was Margarita Carmen Cancino, the daughter of Spanish dancers, shy, soft-spoken, and far from the glamorous myth the world would later worship. But in 1930s Hollywood, a Latina leading lady didn't fit the studio blueprint, so Columbia Pictures made a decision that would define her entire life. They would rebuild her. Harry Cohn, Columbia's ruthless studio chief, believed Margarita looked too ethnic, too foreign, and too dark-haired to become a true American star. His solution was drastic, painful, and permanent. Rita's hairline was lowered by birth, something he decided needed fixing. So the studio ordered years of electrolysis, burning away follicles strip by strip to reshape her face. The procedures were agonizing, leaving her skin raw and swollen for days at a time. Then came the bleaching. Her rich dark hair was stripped, dyed, and processed until it became a fiery copper red. A look that would become iconic, but only at the cost of her natural identity. Margarita Cancino slowly disappeared. Rita Hayworth took her place. Soon, a studio-crafted persona formed around her, the mysterious redhead with smoldering eyes and sensual grace. She became Hollywood's fantasy of perfection, the woman every man wanted and every woman envied. Soldiers in World War II decorated their lockers with her posters. Magazines crowned her the love goddess. She was the embodiment of 1940s glamour. But the world fell in love with a creation, not a woman. Behind closed doors, Rita struggled with the same loneliness that haunts most Hollywood myths. She feared that no one truly saw her, that the real person beneath the makeup and rewiring would never be enough. Her private life reflected that fear. Relationships with powerful men, Orson Welles, Prince Ali Khan, singers, actors, were passionate but turbulent, filled with misunderstandings and expectations based on her screen persona rather than her true self. And the pressures didn't stop as she aged. Harry Cohn demanded she remain forever young, forever sexual, forever the Rita Hayworth he invented. When she needed rest, he refused it. When she sought more complex roles, he denied them. If she appeared tired or less radiant, he berated her. She was no longer a person. She was Columbia's most valuable asset. As years passed, the strain deepened. Rita began experiencing confusion, memory lapses, and emotional distress. Tabloids blamed drinking, mood swings, or personal instability. No one suspected the truth. She was developing early-onset Alzheimer's, a condition largely misunderstood at the time. For years, she was mocked for symptoms she couldn't control. Reporters labeled her difficult. Directors called her unreliable. Friends whispered. Hollywood turned away from the woman whose beauty it had profited from for decades. By the 1970s, Rita's condition worsened. She struggled to remember lines, then conversations, then faces. The industry that once worshipped her didn't come to her aid, not even to acknowledge her suffering. She lived the end of her life quietly, fading from public memory piece by piece until she passed away in 1987 at age 68. Rita Hayworth became an icon through reinvention, but that reinvention cost her everything. Hollywood gave her a new identity, and in the process, stole her own. And her story is echoed in the life of another woman Hollywood claimed to celebrate, but never allowed to stand freely. A woman who broke barriers the industry pretended to praise, while secretly suffocating her. Number 6, Dorothy Dandridge. Before America celebrated Black beauty on magazine covers, before any major studio pretended to care about representation, there was Dorothy Dandridge, a woman so talented, so magnetic, so undeniable that Hollywood had no choice but to acknowledge her. And yet the same industry that put her on a pedestal was terrified of what her success meant. Dorothy didn't just break a barrier, she walked straight into a minefield. She began as a child performer, dazzling audiences with her poise and voice. By her 20s, she was stunning, elegant, sophisticated, and charismatic in a way Hollywood had never seen from a Black actress. When she starred in Carmen Jones, 1954, she became the first Black woman ever nominated for an Academy Award for Best Actress. Overnight, Dorothy became a symbol of possibility, but Hollywood's acceptance came with chains. Studios wanted her to be glamorous, but not too glamorous. They feared a Black woman's beauty could threaten white audiences. They wanted her to be sexy on screen, but not allowed to be in love off screen, especially with white men. They wanted her to be seen, but not touched. Dorothy couldn't even stay in the hotels where she performed unless she entered through service doors. Clubs praised her talent, but forbade her from using their pools. At premieres, she was escorted like a queen, but treated like a guest who didn't belong. To Hollywood, Dorothy was both an asset and a risk. Her love life was where the studio's hypocrisy turned cruel. Dorothy fell deeply for director Otto Preminger, a white man who encouraged her career but insisted their relationship remain a secret. Hollywood was terrified. Interracial relationships weren't just controversial, they were career-ending. Publicists intervened. Studio heads warned her. They made it clear. Dorothy Dandridge could be admired, but never allowed to love freely. Her film roles reflected that restriction. She was repeatedly offered parts as exotic temptresses, tragic outcasts, or characters designed to reinforce the racist fantasies of the era. Whenever she pushed for serious, complex roles, studios politely declined. Hollywood was willing to use her beauty, but not her depth. And behind the glamorous surface, her personal life grew unbearably heavy. Dorothy's daughter, Carolyn, was born with severe brain damage, requiring lifelong care. The emotional and financial weight crushed her. Between limited roles, discrimination, and the high cost of medical support, Dorothy fought to stay afloat. Hollywood didn't help. It simply moved on to the next phase. Her final years were marked by financial turmoil, failed relationships, and a constant battle to reclaim the career stolen from her. She performed in nightclubs, took whatever work she could find, and tried desperately to rebuild the life the industry had chipped away at. On September 8, 1965, Dorothy Dandridge was found dead in her apartment at just 42 years old. The official cause, accidental overdose. But her friends knew what really killed her. A lifetime of carrying the expectations of an industry that celebrated her image while rejecting her humanity. Dorothy was a pioneer, a visionary, and a star who deserved a world far kinder than the one she got. Hollywood lifted her up just far enough for the fall to hurt more. And she wasn't the only one who lived a double life. Because while Dorothy was restricted, the next star was completely rewritten. His love life, his masculinity, and even his public persona, engineered to hide the truth. Number 7, Tab Hunter. In the 1950s, there was no man more perfect than Tab Hunter. Blonde, charming, clean-cut. He looked like he stepped straight out of a Norman Rockwell painting. Teenage girls screamed his name. Magazines called him America's boyfriend. His film posters sold the fantasy that every woman wanted him and every man wanted to be him. But Tab Hunter wasn't real. Not really. Because long before Hollywood discovered him, he was Arthur Gallion, a quiet, introverted kid who loved horses more than people, who never imagined himself becoming a symbol of heterosexual desire. When Warner Brothers signed him, they didn't just give him a new name. They gave him a role he'd have to play for the rest of his life. His agent, Henry Wilson, the same man who renamed stars like Rock Hudson, reinvented Arthur into Tab Hunter, a name designed to sound strong, masculine, and marketable. But the transformation didn't stop at branding. The studio rewrote everything about him: his public hobbies, his friendships, even his romantic life. Tab was gay, but in Eisenhower-era Hollywood, a gay heartthrob was unthinkable. Publicists immediately staged dates with starlets. Natalie Wood, one of the biggest young actresses of the time, became his most frequent girlfriend in the press. They laughed about it privately. Two friends forced to act out a romance for photographers who didn't know the joke. But behind the scenes, Tab lived in fear. Fear of being followed. Fear of a careless look. Fear that one rumor could end everything. And Hollywood had a long memory. Before his fame, Tab had once attended a private gay gathering, an event the police raided. His name briefly appeared in papers, but no one cared. He wasn't a star yet. Years later, when he became famous, tabloids like Confidential dug through his past and threatened to expose him. Warner Brothers scrambled to bury the story, using lawyers and pressure to silence reporters. It worked, but the damage was done. Tab learned that his life was not his own. As his career skyrocketed, the control tightened. Warner Brothers monitored who visited him. They tracked where he went. If he spent too much time with certain friends, he received warnings. When rumors grew too loud, the studio directed him to appear publicly with a new actress. A pre-planned distraction. Tab Hunter wasn't just acting in movies. He was acting every hour of his public life. His talent, ironically, was overshadowed by his own persona. He was genuinely gifted, delivering powerful performances in films like Gunman's Walk, and even earning critical praise for his dramatic range. But Hollywood didn't want depth from him. They wanted a fantasy. And fantasies are disposable. By the late 1950s, Tab began pushing against the system. He wanted more creative control, more serious roles, more honesty. Warner Brothers responded by freezing him out. Leading roles dried up. His music career, once wildly successful, faded. The studios simply moved on to the next handsome young face who was easier to control. For years, Tab drifted between minor films and television roles, trying to reclaim the identity he lost. Not the studio-created heartthrob, but the real person beneath the name. It wasn't until decades later, in his memoir, Tab Hunter Confidential, that he finally told his truth. He spent half a lifetime smiling for cameras that never knew him, and the other half trying to find the person Hollywood buried. Tab Hunter survived the lie. Barely. But the next star wasn't as lucky. The final story is the rawest, darkest, and most devastating of all. A woman Hollywood didn't just control, but chewed up, scandalized, and abandoned to die. Number 8. Barbara Payton. Barbara Payton's rise was fast, dazzling, and dangerous. The kind of story Hollywood loves to tell, but never wants to take responsibility for. In the late 1940s, when she first arrived in Los Angeles, she possessed the kind of beauty that made agents lean forward in their chairs. Ice blonde hair, piercing blue eyes, and a confidence that felt electric. Producers said she had something special. Studios whispered she was the next big thing. And for a brief moment, she was. Barbara's early films, Kiss Tomorrow Goodbye with James Cagney, Only the Valiant with Gregory Peck, showcased a woman who could hold her own against the era's biggest male stars. She was sharp, sexy, modern, and unstoppable. But behind the scenes, Hollywood executives grew uneasy. Barbara was talented, yes, but she was also bold, outspoken, and refused to play the obedient starlet molded by studio hands. In the 1950s, that was a sin Hollywood didn't forgive. Barbara lived with a freedom that made the industry nervous. She partied openly, loved intensely, and didn't hide her affairs the way other actresses were forced to. She wasn't willing to play the good girl studio publicists tried to craft for her. And the moment a woman stopped playing nice, Hollywood turned on her fast. The turning point came with a scandal that made headlines across the country. Barbara became involved with two men at once: rising actor Tom Neal, known for his volatility, and Franchot Tone, a polished, respected studio star. The rivalry grew vicious. In 1951, fueled by jealousy, Tom Neal violently attacked Tone, leaving him with a broken cheekbone, a smashed nose, and brain damage. Hollywood needed someone to blame, and they chose Barbara. Studios labeled her toxic, reckless, dangerous to work with. Tabloids painted her as a femme fatale who drove men to madness. Producers whispered that her career was a risk not worth taking. The men involved continued working. Barbara's career was destroyed overnight. Once the darling of Warner Bros., she was suddenly shut out. Casting directors refused to see her. Publicists abandoned her. She went from major studio films to low-budget projects, including the notoriously campy Bride of the Gorilla. Each step down the ladder chipped away at her reputation, and Hollywood watched it happen with a mix of judgment and satisfaction. Without roles, Barbara spiraled. She drank heavily. She struggled financially. Relationships collapsed. Friends distanced themselves. By the early 1960s, she was no longer a star. She was a tabloid spectacle. Barbara wrote an autobiography, I Am Not Ashamed, a raw confession of her life in Hollywood. But instead of empathy, she received ridicule. The industry mocked her honesty, calling her story proof of her downfall. No one wanted to admit how much of that downfall they caused. Her final years were heartbreaking. Barbara lived in rundown apartments, worked odd jobs, signed autographs in bars for a few dollars, and drifted through Hollywood like a ghost of the star she once was. Addiction and poverty ravaged her health. On May 8, 1967, Barbara Payton died from heart and liver failure at just 39 years old. No studio mourned her. No major obituary honored her. Hollywood had already erased her. First her career, then her dignity, and finally her memory. Barbara Payton's life wasn't a scandal. It was a system failure. A warning about what happens when an actress refuses to live a lie, and Hollywood decides she must be punished for it. Hollywood's golden age still glitters in memory. The gowns, the spotlights, the premieres, the legends born under those shimmering marquee lights. But beneath the glamour lay a quiet, relentless machine that shaped human beings into myths, and then trapped them inside the myths it created. Rock Hudson, Judy Garland, Jean Harlow, Montgomery Clift, Rita Hayworth, Dorothy Dandridge, Tab Hunter, Barbara Payton, 8 stars who rose higher than most ever will. Yet each of them paid a price the public never saw. They hid their identities, their pain, their past, their truth. They smiled for cameras knowing the image wasn't theirs. They followed scripts written not for movies, but for their lives. Some lived behind masks. Some lived behind fear. Some lived behind fantasies the studios demanded they become. And some, like Barbara Payton and Dorothy Dandridge, didn't survive the lies at all. The studio system wasn't just a workplace. It was a world, one that dictated what a star should look like, sound like, love like, and behave like. A world where authenticity was dangerous and truth was a liability. A world that forced its brightest talents to perform long after the director called cut. Today, Hollywood is different, but echoes of that control still remain. The desire for perfection, the rewriting of narratives, the pressure to be someone else. As we leave these stories behind, one question lingers. How many legends did we truly know? And how many were simply characters the studios needed them to be? Because in Hollywood, the spotlight reveals everything, but it also hides more than we're ever allowed to see.